Heyo, what's up legends? Welcome back to another Ever Crisis video and yet another Should You Pull video featuring the reawakened Final Fantasy IX crossover banner that has the reprints for Zidane outfit and weapon for Cloud and the Amarant outfit and weapon for Tifa, with a few changes and a new weapon for Zack. Thankfully, the Garnet Rod is not on this banner because, let's be honest, that weapon was pretty trash. But fear not, if you have invested into that weapon, it's probably going to make a comeback with some updates in the next banner, probably with Kuja's Spirit Blade and maybe even something else. So let's take a look at the banner and what it has to offer. As mentioned, the Zidane's outfit has an update going from boost HP 10 points and boost physical ability potency 10 points to 15 points of each. That gives you instant level 3 of boost HP and level 3 of boost physical ability potency just from the outfit alone. So that is a nice little upgrade if you already have the outfit from the original banners, the original event, and it is a little bit of incentive for players, newer players or players that started after the event to grab these outfits. Pretty much the same thing with Tifa's outfit. It has exactly the same R ability points and exactly the same updates, so 5 points each, and yeah, gives a little bit of incentive to pull on this banner. I'm not sure even then if it's worth it, but these outfits will definitely be quite good. As for the weapons, Zidane's Sword, as many of you may know, who've been playing since the event, is a pretty powerful physical non-elemental weapon with boost physical ability potency and a triangle sigil. There are no updates to this weapon this time around because it is already pretty good. Tifa's Amarant's Claws, on the other hand, is very similar but has an update. So pretty strong physical non-elemental weapon, also has boost physical ability potency, and it debuffs the enemies. It buffs Tifa's physical attack by high potency. With the update, if her HP is 50% or more, she now debuffs the enemy's magic attack by mid to high potency. That's a nice little bit of an upgrade to bring it a little bit more in line with some of the more modern weapons. And then of course the star of the show is Beatrix Sword, the new weapon for Zack. It is a very powerful physical wind weapon that deals more damage when the target is debuffed. So that is a pretty interesting weapon and looks pretty good, to be honest. So jumping into some quick comparisons. For the original weapons, the Zidane Sword and Amarant's Claws, I'm going to just compare them each to one weapon. Some of the more recent weapons. So for Zidane Sword, the easiest comparison is against the latest similar category weapon, you could say, in Vincent's Hugin and Munin. Let's take a look at that. The primary stat of the Hugin and Munin is higher than the Zidane Sword. The total R ability points are a little bit higher on Vincent's weapon, but the spread, in my opinion, of the R ability points is better for Cloud's weapon. Vincent's weapon has an attack boost for Ice extra in the support materia, so that's a little better. And of course, their command abilities are pretty much identical, except one is physical, one is magical, and of course Vincent has his limit gauge gimmick. And one is limited and one is not limited, and you could say that they are as good, if not better. So, weapon synergies, there are no real super good synergies with Zidane's Sword, honestly. It obviously synergizes with all of his physical weapons. So, any of the physical elemental weapons or any other physical weapon, you'll have with Murasame, Sky Split, and Maritime Sword, for example, a maxed out boost physical attack. And then you also have the elemental damage from those weapons and non-elemental damage from Zidane's Sword. That's okay. The better synergies are with Glavinus Sword, which is a really expensive synergy because both of these weapons are limited, but you'll have a maxed out physical ability potency, and then you'll have the physical defense debuff and the physical attack buff from Glavinus Sword, which is pretty good. And then the budget version of this, not the same thing, but a similar thing, would be Zidane's Sword and Hard Edge, which at least gives you that physical defense debuff, so Zidane's Sword can hit that much harder. For sub-weapon value, it's pretty straightforward. It's got a total of 85 R ability points, which makes it a good sub-weapon. and obviously with physical attack and physical ability potency, it is a great sub-weapon for any physical DPS. Amarant's Claws, I decided to compare it with the Feathered Gloves, because while not exactly the same, they are fairly similar in a certain way. Feathered Gloves is also fairly recent, and so that's the best thing I could think of. Let's take a look, shall we? So the primary stats on Amarant's Claws is better, and the total R ability points on the Feathered Gloves is R101, so that's the best. It's definitely better than Amarant's Claws. And then the support materia for the Feathered Gloves actually has a bit more packed into it, because it has the attack boost for water and an X sigil boost, whereas Amarant's Claws just has the P attack boosts. And then, of course, the command abilities are similar but different. The Amarant's Claws obviously does more damage, but the Feathered Gloves costs 1 less ATB at 3. And then both of them have a debuff and a buff, basically. So Amarant's Claws has the conditional debuff of 50% or more HP will lower the enemy's magic attack by mid to high potency, whereas the Feathered Gloves has the magic defense debuff of mid to mid. So it can't reach high potency, so Amarant's Claws is a bit better there. And then both of them have the buff. So for Amarant's Claws, it's a physical attack buff to Tifo herself of high to high potency. It lasts 40 seconds, which is pretty nice. And then the Feathered Gloves is water damage increase of high to high for 35 seconds to herself as well. They're actually very similar weapons if you compare them overall, our ability points, stats, all of that. Very comparable. You could even argue that the Feathered Gloves are better, and again, they are non-limited weapon versus the limited claws. Weapon synergies are similar to Zidane's sword, nothing crazy. Obviously, all of her physical weapons are going to benefit from this, because it gives a physical attack buff of high potency to herself. So think things like Holy Flame Gloves, Motor Drive, and special shout out to Sonic Striker, because even though the R abilities are not very synergistic, the R abilities of Sonic Striker are pretty sad, to be honest, but it is a fast casting, powerful physical attack, so it will benefit from Amarant's Claws and hit pretty hard. Then the other slightly more synergistic weapons, you could say, are the Leather Gloves, which turns her into sort of an offensive debuffer. So she will get obviously the physical attack buff from the Amarant's Claws, which won't mean much because both of them are kind of low percentage non-elemental attacks, but the main thing is that you get both a magic attack and a physical attack debuff. So enemies like Bahamut and the duo summons and all these kind of things, you can really weaken their attack with this setup. Finally, Guard Gloves is probably one of the better synergies, but again, an expensive synergy because both of these are limited weapons. So you will have maxed out boost physical ability potency, and of course you will hit really hard because Amarant's Claws raises your physical attack and Guard Gloves just hits hard. And then you have the magic attack debuff as the cherry on top. The sub-weapon value is pretty much the same as the Zidane's sword. Total of 85 points. It's got HP and physical ability potency, so again, it's a great sub-weapon for a physical DPS. Not much else to say there. So let's move on to, once again, the star of the show, and that is the Beatrix Sword. Take a look at that. Because it is the new weapon, I'm going to compare it to at least two weapons, two recent weapons, one that is not limited and the other that is limited. And I've chosen the Shell Knuckles, which is very similar, and the Carrying Gloves, which also is pretty similar. They could be considered similar category weapons. So the primary stats of Beatrix Sword is much better, or quite a bit better than Shell Knuckles. Total R ability points is also better with 83 versus 70, with more points on the elemental potency. Support materia is pretty much the same, and the command abilities are pretty much identical except physical versus magical, and the condition for the Beatrix Sword is better, so you just need the enemy to be debuffed and you get 1.2 times damage, whereas with Shell Knuckles you actually have to be 70% HP or above, so you have to really stay healthy to get that extra damage. For the Curing Gloves, they actually have pretty much, well, they have exactly the same primary stat, so equal there, and then again 83 versus 70 total R ability points, so that's really where this weapon outshines. with more elemental potency. Same support materia again, and very similar command abilities again, except this time the condition is 50% versus debuff, and the additional effect is 1.2 times damage versus a magic attack increase of mid to mid. So you could say the Beatrix Sword is better than both of these weapons. Weapon synergies is actually quite a lot to cover here. I was considering taking out the first 3 weapons because the synergies aren't that amazing, but there are still synergy there, so I figured I might as well cover them. So we have the Beatrix Sword with the Cutlass, which is going to give you a physical defense debuff. So not only are you going to hit harder because the enemy's physical defense is debuffed and the Beatrix Sword is a physical weapon, but you're going to get that 1.2 times damage because they will be debuffed. So it's going to hit really hard. Pretty much similar thing with Black Whiskers, except you have maxed out boost physical attack this time, and you have dual debuffs, so you have the physical defense and the water resist. Not sure how helpful the water resist is going to be, considering one is wind and the other is non-elemental, but it's there. You might have some other water damage on your team, who knows. And again, it's going to hit really hard because their physical defense is going to be debuffed, and because they're debuffed, the Beatrix Sword does its times 1.2 damage. And then finally, pretty much the same thing with Pressure Ridge. Maxed out boost physical attack, you get the dual element this time, unlike the Black Whiskers, which is non-elemental. This has ice damage as well, so you have ice and wind, and you can hit really hard once again with the debuff. Except this time it's not physical defense, so it won't hit as hard, but you still get that extra boost in damage from the Beatrix Sword. Now, the better versions of these weapons are the Twinkling Star, because again, you get dual debuffs. This time, you're debuffing the enemy's magic attack and their physical defense, which is that perfect combo of lower physical defense plus debuff equals tons of damage from Beatrix Sword. Ceremonial Sword is kind of the other way around. This time, it doesn't bring any debuffs, but it raises Zack's own physical attack by high potency. So naturally, the Beatrix Sword is just going to hit harder with that extra physical attack. And then, of course, if you have someone else on your team that can debuff the enemy's physical defense, that's going to really combo nicely. And then finally, moving away from buffs and debuffs and all of that, we have the Falchion, which, because it's a physical wind weapon, just gives you straight up max boost physical attack and the level 8 sweet spot of boost wind potency with just these 2 weapons. And then, as the cherry on top, again, you get a powerful single target physical wind attack, and you get AoE physical wind damage as well. So that is pretty nice. And I would say those synergies are all really good in terms of at least the last 3 weapons. Especially Ceremonial Sword, if you have another physical defense debuffer on the team, then you're really compounding the effects and the damage. Sub-weapon value, again, total points of 83. Not much to say here. It's a great sub-weapon for physical wind DPS specifically. So overall, the Zidane Sword is a decent weapon. It's got 85 total points. It has the powerful non-elemental command ability, and it's a great sub-weapon for physical DPS. It is the 5th best physical attack stat category with a few other weapons, so it's still up there in terms of stats. Reasons to pull for it, a couple of them at least, are if you don't have a good offhand weapon for Cloud, like Glavenus Sword or Hard Edge. Also, if you don't have enough or any of this category weapon, so there are quite a few weapons in the game now that are non-elemental, that do like 1300, 1400, around that percentage damage. You don't have any or many of those types of weapons, could be worth considering. Or, of course, if you pulled for it previously and you're close to something like an OB6 or an OB10, then you might want to try and get a few copies. And the last reason is if you don't have a good physical ability potency sub-weapon. So that's something like Barrett's enemy launcher, for example, something like that. But that is honestly not the best reason to pull for a limited weapon. You could probably get that from other weapons, non-limited weapons. And so overall, yeah, those are a few reasons to pull. I couldn't really think of anything else. Moving on and taking a look at Tifa's Amarant claws. It's a pretty similar situation here. This is a decent versatile weapon. It is arguably the best offhand weapon for any physical Tifa build, so it's got that going for it. And it's got, again, standard good total R ability points. And as mentioned earlier, it can form the core of an offensive neutering build. So with the leather gloves, you can lower the enemy's physical attack and magic attack with that combo. Couple of reasons to pull for Amarant's Claws is pretty much the same as Zidane's sword. So if you don't have a good offhand weapon like the guide gloves for Tifa, or if you pulled for it previously and you're close to the OB6, OB10 as mentioned, same thing. If you don't have a good physical ability potency sub-weapon, I shouldn't have even added that because it's not a reason to pull for a limited weapon. You should probably just go for a non-limited weapon if you need that. And now we get on to the Beatrix Sword. This is a very good weapon, not gonna lie. It's got the second best physical attack stat in the game behind only the Glavinus Sword. Obviously it shares the stat with a few others, but they're all the second best. It's standard in terms of 83 total R ability points. That's good compared to other similar weapons that only have 70. And obviously it's a fantastic sub-weapon for physical wind DPS. It has great synergy with plenty of his other weapons, and it actually has a fairly fast cast speed. So it's not like super quick like Sonic Striker or most of Tifa's weapons, honestly, but it's also not too slow. So it's like it's really decent. Couple of reasons to pull for this weapon is if you are a whale or if you've saved forever so that you can afford both this and the anniversary banners, then sure. Also, if you want a very strong physical wind DPS, you don't have one, or you want another one. Also, if you already have high overboosted synergy weapons like the Twinkling Star, the Falchion, and the Ceremonial Sword, those are pretty good reasons to pull for this, I suppose. Or if you want to complete a powerful wind team, so for example you have Sephiroth with Dark Heavens and Shinra Military Sword, and you have Aerith with Floral Wand, then you can add Zack with this and the Falchion, and you'll have a really cracked wind physical damage team. Still, this is a limited weapon, so that needs to be taken into consideration. And the biggest thing, just like in the previous video that I mentioned, the biggest consideration for pulling for any banners right now, and one of the reasons, besides for the fact that I was just too busy, that I didn't make a video for the previous banner with that really nice Lucia outfit, is because you have to consider the first anniversary is getting closer and closer, and all we really know is that there are going to be new weapon types added for each character from the data mine. We don't exactly know what that means, but yeah, there's going to be a bunch of new weapons coming out in the first anniversary, and even though we don't know if they're going to be, how good they're going to be, I assume because it's the first anniversary, they're going to be good. And this is just something, especially if you're a free-to-play player, that you have to consider when deciding to pull on these banners. Are you going to pull on this banner now, which you totally could, and then possibly miss out on the first anniversary? If that's something you don't mind, then sure. But if you're really excited for the first anniversary like I am, then try your best to skip and save. So with that in mind, let's take a look at my final thoughts. For Zidane's Sword, it is a pretty solid weapon, especially if you don't have a similar weapon. It's not really worth chasing if you don't already have a bunch of copies from the first time this came around. And then of course it is a limited weapon, and this is the second reprint of this banner, so you probably won't see it for a very long time again, if even ever. And then also Power Creep has introduced non-limited weapons that are pretty much as good, if not better than this weapon. So think Ceremonial Sword, Hugin and Moonin. So I would say skip this, prioritize the anniversary. Very similar thoughts with Tifa's Amarant's Claws. It is a great versatile weapon. It's got boost HP and R ability. It's got buffs and debuffs in the command ability. But again, limited weapon, second reprint, probably won't see it for a very long time. And the power creep situation, once again, makes things like the Feathered Loves, which are a non-limited weapon, as good, if not better, depending on the situation, of course. So I would say skip it, prioritize the anniversary. But for the star of the show, This is a really tough one to skip, but yeah, the weapon is very good and it does outshine others in its category. And what I mean by that is there are a few a few elemental weapons now that do 940% specifically and have some kind of additional effect attached to it. It outshines those in terms of the fact that most of those only have a total of 70 R ability points, whereas this one has 83, so that is very good. And then on top of that, the conditional for its additional effect is a lot simpler in my opinion. The enemy just needs to have a debuff on them and you can do 1.2 times damage. Whereas other similar weapons, you either have to have 70% or more HP, which can actually be tricky in a lot of fights, or, you know, some other kind of conditional thing to get your additional effect. So this is a really good weapon. And then on top of that, what I mentioned earlier, it synergizes really nicely with a lot of his existing weapons. At the end of the day, same thing applies. Limited weapon and the banner might not come back in a long time. So even though it's tough and this weapon is really good, I would say prioritize the anniversary. But in the end of the day, you play the game how you want to play. You really love Zac and you really want this weapon, you don't mind skipping on the anniversary, then go for it. But as always, thank you so much for watching. I really hope that I will be able to see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.